So we just concluded, or we just wrapped up with the halfway point of Loki season 2. Let's jump right into it, y'all. Since we're again halfway through, it makes sense to review the show at where it's currently at, with 3 more episodes left to go. Now, if you have not watched the show, you've been warned now. There may or may not be some spoilers coming up here in this halfway review, but we wrapped up with Loki season 2, picking up where it left off with season 1, where the timeline started to branch off into different timelines, and the TVA, everything was changing, and Loki came back, and he ran into Morbius, who's played by Owen Wilson. So Loki season 2 picks up with episode 1, which is titled Ouroboros, and that's where we're introduced to Loki's time slipping or time glitching, kind of see it in Into the Spider-Verse. Same concept there, where Loki is essentially slipping between the past and the future, and so there's this interesting play on him communicating with his past self or communicating with the character Ouroboros. Now, you may or may not recognize the actor that plays Ouroboros. He was also in the movie Goonies, a classic watch if you haven't yet seen it.
And Chunk.
He was in the movie Goonies. He played Data, and he was also in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where he plays Short Round.
You know nuts. He's crazy.
And then he was also in Everything All Together, All the Time, or All at Once, where he played, the main Wayman character. But he is an absolute delight in the show thus far, and one of the characters that adds to an already solid cast of characters. You got Owen Wilson coming back. You also have Tom Hiddleston doing his thing consistently as Loki. I mean, he is a long mainstay in the MCU with a character that's been consistent for the most part since his introductory back in the movie Thor. But the episode essentially centers around them trying to find a MacGuffin or a way to fix Loki. They try to find a MacGuffin or use Ouroboros to create a MacGuffin that helps Loki from time glitching or time slipping. But in episode 2, it centers around Morbius and Loki trying to find the Loki variant of himself, Sylvie. So Sophie DiMartino's Sylvie variant returns here in episode 2. They try to hunt her down. But here in episode 3, it centers around them trying to finally find a variant to He Who Remains, and that's the Kang variant, or the variant that stands at the end of time. Or they're trying to find a variant of him to fix the temporal loom that's starting to malfunction and essentially cause the entire TVA to kind of collapse and fall apart. Now, here recently, it's episode 3 where I really think the show takes its production value and its overall acting and writing to the next level. I mean, it's top notch. It's some of the best acting and writing we've seen, especially in a Disney Plus MCU show to date. And it was essentially a delight. It was essentially a joy. I found myself engaged throughout the entirety of the episode. It was really neat to see Victor Timely's variant, or that Kang variant of himself, Victor Timely, all the inventions and things he created around that time, because the show centers heavily around the mid 1860s to early 1890s, somewhere around there in that general timeline, where they kind of shift back and forth between time. But it's a really interesting play on time travel and not so much multiversal travel. And again, while the theme of this phase was supposed to be heavy on multiversal timeline travel, or just dealing with the multiverse altogether, it seems more like with Loki, the show is actually focusing more on time. Now, the TVA does have time in its acronym, right? The Time Variant Authority, but it seems to deal more with time travel than multiversal travel, which so far is okay with me. They're not necessarily breaking any rules, because Loki as a show has yet to set any firm, rules or the boundaries on how time travel works within the MCU, at least from what we saw in Endgame. What you do in the past doesn't change your future, it only creates a new timeline.
Changing the past doesn't change the future. If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future, and your former present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future.
Exactly.
So we have yet to see what the effects that Loki season 2 has on the MCU going forward here. One of the biggest problems, or one of the main reasons why they even went back in time and searched for the variant of Victor Timely, or King the Conqueror, or He Who Remains. It gets a little confusing, I know, but again, bear with me. But the main reason why they went back in time to search for him is because they needed the Aurora, or his energy, to stabilize the particle system, or the temporal system that stabilizes the multiverse, or that stabilizes the central timeline, or the core timeline, the sacred timeline. I mean, this is the overarching plot device or plot mechanism or what moves the plot throughout each episode. But it was neat seeing all the inventions that Victor Timely had invented during that timeline. I mean, everything from like a refrigerated chair to some type of energy dispulsion weapon that like evaporated all material. So general things like that. Miss Minutes also returned heavy in this episode with Ravonna Renslayer. She appears to have a motive of her own where she's working with Miss Minutes. In one moment she was working with Victor Timely, but again, you have to watch the episode to see how it all plays out. But Renslayer, she appears to have her own intention or her own motive, as she is apparently in contact with He Who Remains, or a variant of He Who Remains, who's also working with Renslayer to possibly stabilize or fix the TVA. The episode does end on a major cliffhanger that involves Miss Minutes and Ravonna Renslayer. So again, you're gonna have to watch episode 3 if you're already all caught up, or go ahead and start on episode 1 and 2. So not only those things were all positives in this episode, and overall as the show progresses and we make our way to episode 4, but episodes 1, 2, and 3 all struck a chord and hitting the high notes in terms of production value and good acting, solid, plot movement and things. It's really neat and fun to see Loki again using his gifts or using his abilities and his magic to kind of overcome his foes, or being very easy, just simple beings like humans. But for the most part, it's interesting to see him just kind of use his abilities to either terrify them or just overcome them. He did this again in episode 3, and it's actually quite consistent here in episodes 1 and 2, where he's using his magic and things to kind of get what he needs or get the information what he needs. Really interesting to see Marvel finally let Loki become a villain in his own show. But so far, I am enjoying Loki season 2 more than I enjoyed Loki season 1. It is some of the best content on Disney Plus right now that is connected to the overall arch and theme of the MCU. At first, I was a little worried with all the multiversal timeline shenanigans that was going on here in Phase 5, but it looks like Loki could possibly be the show that could clean up the whole multiverse madness, or the whole multiverse mess, if you will, that'll eventually lead us over into the Marvels and will close out 2023 for the MCU. There were a few silly mishaps along the way, especially here in episode 3, where it was just more contrivance based and like, oh wow, that kind of happened at the right time or right moment, or just some other, plot holes that I guess seeing people in the past watching these beings fight with like futuristic weapons and these things happening, you would think would have a bigger impact on the timeline or just the people around them, but it's just kind of glanced or glossed over. But for the most part, all of what makes the elements of a good show watchable, Loki thus far has delivered on episodes 1, 2, and 3. I highly recommend you give it a watch. And if I had to rate the show thus far between the halfway mark, right, if I had to give the show a current rating thus far or where we at, I would give it about a solid 4 out of 5. Enjoyable, watchable. It has moments where it revisits some of that MCU humor that we come to grow and love early on. It's interesting to finally see another variant of Kang after seeing him in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which we didn't review that movie on the channel, but I mean, if you've seen it, then you know. We haven't seen a Kang variant since then, so it's interesting to see Jonathan Majors coming back to play that character and to see how much more we will see him as Kang going here as Loki progresses, and just overall how would the show, connect with the Marvels, because that's essentially the next event in the MCU to take place after Loki concludes. So we'll have to wait and see. But with that said, it's been your boy Lab. If this is your first time to the channel, do be sure to hit the subscribe button for me on your way in or on your way out. Like this video, and I do hope to catch you all in the next one. So until then, be easy.